This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, Rabbi. So we're learning about Hilchos Karpas. We're going to talk about why you have to wash your hands for Karpas. And again, we just mentioned that whenever you eat something that's dipped in a liquid, the Berura says, many Rishonim hold, you have to wash your hands. Now, why would you have to wash your hands? You're not eating bread. Let's first understand, why do you have to wash your hands before you eat bread? Hands are a sheni betuma. A sheni betuma cannot render any food a shlishi, with one exception, and that exception is truma. Sheni betuma could make truma a shlishi. Okay, but you say, but I'm not eating truma. The answer is, but kohanim, when the Beis Hamikdash stood, when they would eat truma, they would have to wash their hands before they eat truma. But I'm not a kohen. But a gezerah, if I would be a kohen. Yeah, but the Beis Hamikdash is not standing. But if the Beis Hamikdash was standing. So basically, Netilas Yadayim for bread is required. It's a gezerah atu the kohanim, and it's a gezerah atu the time the Beis Hamikdash was standing. So even though we're not kohanim, and even though the Beis Hamikdash is not standing, we still wash Netilas Yadayim. Fine, that is step one. So yeah. But why do you wash your hands for something that's dipped in a liquid? So take a look in Siman Kuf Nun Ches. Okay, very important halacha. Im oichel davar, if you eat something, shetibulai biyachad mishiva mashkin, that's dipped in one of the 7 liquids. What are the 7 liquids? Shesimanam, yad, shachat, dam. The hand slaughters the blood. This is Siman Kuf Nun Ches. You have it? Sif Daled. Yeah. Im oichel davar shetibulai biyachad mishiva mashkin, shesimanam, yad, shachat, dam. What does Yad Shachat Dam stand for? Yad Shachat Dam stands for, what does it stand for? Yayin, Dvash, Shemen, Chalav, Tal, Dam, Mayim, right? Yad stands for Yayin and Dvash. Shachat stands for Shemen, Chalav, and Tal. Dam stands for blood, Dam, Mayim. In other words, if you dip a food item in either wine or honey, or oil, or milk, or blood, or water, right? Those are the Shiva Mashkim. So then, one has to wash Netilas Yadayim. Person has to wash Netilas Yadayim. By the way, that comes to exclude if something is dipped in mei peiros, if something is dipped in the fruit, in liquid of fruits, in other words, apple juice, orange juice, you do not have to wash Netilas Yadayim. But if something is dipped in wine, or honey, or oil, or milk, or dew, or blood, you have to wash Netilas Yadayim. So for example, if you take your Oreos cookies, and you dip it in milk, you're mechuyev to wash Netilas Yadayim before you eat it. We'll see. Okay? Right. Without a bracha. That's without a bracha. You dip coffee and you dip a donut in coffee, you have to wash Netilas Yadayim. You dip your kakish cake in milk, you're mechuyev to wash Netilas Yadayim the same way you have to wash Netilas Yadayim for bread. Without. We'll see. Okay, we didn't get to that yet.
It tells us it doesn't have the same.
We'll see. It does. We'll see. V'loy nisnagev, if it's not dry. Even if your hand is not touching the liquid. Tzarech netila b'loy bracha. You have to wash your hands without a bracha. Let us see the Mishna Berura in Sivkatan Chaf.
If something is wet, same thing or no?
Any food that's wet with any of these 7 liquids, you have to wash until Yadayim before you eat it.
You eat grapes, you wash grapes, you have to wash?
I have to wash until Yadayim me'ikar hadin. It's a chiv netilas Yadayim. But, and we do hold that way.
We do?
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
What? No, he's saying, let's say you wash grapes. Let's say you wash grapes. You have to wash until Yadayim. But if you dry them, you don't have to wash until Yadayim. But if you wash a fruit, if the fruit is at all wet, we'll say, we don't have time to read everything inside. How wet? If it's toifeach almanas lahatfiach, that means if you touch it, and the wetness on your finger could make something else wet, which is basically most of the time. So you have to wash until Yadayim. Now we're going to see that the Mishna Berura acknowledges the fact that the minhag ha'olam is not to wash until Yadayim, and he also says the minhag ha'olam is wrong, and he says you have to. Okay, so we're gonna talk about this today.
Okay.
No, so I'm sorry. So why do you have to wash your hands for karpas? The Mishnah Berura said, because it's a vegetable that you're dipping into the salt water. Salt water is water, it's one of the 7 liquids. So you always have to wash your hands before you dip any food in a liquid. Yeah, I'm sorry.
The gzera that because it was done the same time as the halacha
Of washing for bread?
Yeah. Because
No, it's a separate gezerah. Now let's talk
we
about...
talked about it last week, but I think
Yeah?
that if the gzera right away explains why, then if it's not shaykh today, then we
So-
bottle. Otherwise,
well, we'll see. It's a different gezerah. Let's talk about what the reason for this gezerah is. And the reason is the following. This is the Mishnah Berura of Katan Yud Aleph. Look in Yud Aleph. Hainu, afilu yerek, even vegetables, upeiros, Yud Aleph. Upeiros, ubasar, whether it's vegetables, fruits, or meat. Fiafa gavda al peiros loy tiknu until siadayim. Even though everybody knows you don't have to wash your hands before you eat fruits, the answer is there the fruits themselves do not become tummy. In other words, whenever you eat a fruit, why don't you wash your hands? Because your hands are a sheni, and they don't make a fruit a shlishi. But halacha is like this: even though a sheni b'tumah cannot make a shlishi b'tumah, but if a sheni b'tumah comes in contact with liquid, there's a special halacha that the sheni b'tumah makes the liquid a rishon b'tumah. It's halacha, right? There's no, it's a din. It's a din. A sheni b'tumah makes the liquid a rishon b'tumah. Then the rishon b'tumah then makes your fruit a sheni b'tumah. So you say, who cares? I'm allowed to eat a sheni b'tumah. I'm tamei meis anyway. But nevertheless, the gezerah was made at a time that Klal Yisrael was nizar b'tumah v'tara, and that's the halacha. Whenever you eat a fruit or a vegetable or meat or cookie or any food that's wet, you're mechuyev to wash the tilas yadayim. So you'll ask, so when I eat cereal and milk in the morning, my cereal is wet, I have to wash the tilas yadayim. No, that's because that's something you always eat with a fork, with a kli, with a spoon, excuse me. So therefore, your hands won't come in contact with that food. And therefore you don't have to wash the tilas yadayim. But if you dip a fruit, a cookie, a donut in milk and coffee, what we're learning now is you have to wash until yadayim. Me'ikr hadin, it's not a minog, it's a chiyuv d'Rabbanan. Like Mikra Megillah, like netilas yadayim for bread.
You could dip in the salt water with a fork.
So let's talk about that. We'll talk about
Well,
that.
then why is it that the roll call Israel doesn't appear for that?
We'll see. Well, one thing we know is that Jews are not impressed by numbers, right? Well, that it can't be, right? We don't go by numbers. Numbers don't mean anything.
bread if you take with the glove, you don't make it.
What?
If you eat it with the glove.
When does that kick in?
That's by takana. This is a din. Here, let's see. Look what he says. Look in now the Mechaber adds B'loi bracha, without a bracha. Why without a bracha? Look in Sif Katan Chaf. Ki yesh miktsas harishonim. There are some rishonim, the savri that hold shalai hitzrichu chachamim netilas yadayim. The chachamim do not require netilas yadayim l'davar shetibulei b'mashka, for something dipped in a liquid. Ela b'yimehem, only in the olden days shahayu oichlam b'tahara, that they would eat in purity. Masha'en kein achshav. But nowadays, shekulanu tmei mesim, that we're all tamei meis, ulakach lo yavarich an atilas yadayim shesafek brachos lahakol. In other words, there's a minority view that this halacha is obsolete. The majority, says the Mishnah Berura, and by the way, for Sfardim, the Kaf HaChaim and the Ben Ish Chai and all the Sfardic Poskim agree that the Ruba the Poskim say that you are mechuyev. And therefore, for a bracha, we're mekel. Savik brachos lakula. Now listen to this. So you say, but nobody does this. V'inei b'magen Avram hevi, the Magen Avram brings, b'shem halachem chamudos, d'ha'olam noyagim shalalita. The minog is not to wash. V'yesh l'hem amal she'yismeichel. It says the Magen Avram, the velt has what to rely on. Which is, who do they have what to rely on? Those rishonim that say that you're not mechuyev anymore, that the din is obsolete. Al mixos rishonim. Aval harbe achroinim hechmiru ma'oid. Many achroinim are very machmer. V'kasvu, and they all write to ha'ikar kareva poskim. The ikar halacha is like majority poskim that tzarch netila medina, that you're required me'ikar din to wash af bizman hazeh, even nowadays. Says the Vilna Gaon, you even have to make a bracha. Al netilas yadayim. V'ayin bebira hagra, shegam daita kain. The gra also is maskim, you have to wash. V'hechmir ma'oid, the gra is very machmir. Sha'af tzarech levarich al zay, that you even have to make a bracha. Says the Mishnah Berura. Now, before I tell you the Mishnah Berura's conclusion, let me tell you what some of the other poskim bring down over here. And like this, other poskim bring down the following: that Shulchan Aruch Harav says, "B'medinos elu lo nohagu roiv hamoinam lito yadayim." Says the Shulchan Aruch Harav, most average people do not wash, and we could be malamed zchus on them because they rely on the mikzas harishonim. He says the Shulchan Aruch Harav, "Ein limchos biyad," and we don't protest against them. But the ikar is not like what they're doing. The ikar halacha is you have to wash. The Chaye Adam also says, "Bizman hazeh only big tzaddikim wash."
Why are we relying on mixer?
Says the Aruch HaShulchan, many people are not nizar b'chol hashana. However, despite all of this, listen to the conclusion of the Mishnah Berura. Mishnah Berura says, "Minag, minag, very nice. We won't throw tomatoes at you, but you're not doing the right thing. You're not doing the right thing." And therefore he says like this: V'lechein after ha'olam ein noegin levarach al kapanim, ein lehakel lechel b'li netila. You cannot be mekel. So the Mishnah Berura is not saying it's toiv to wash your hands. He's not saying it's a nice thing. He's saying you have to do it. If you don't do it, fine. We'll still let you sit and come into the shul. But that's the halacha. The halacha is, bottom line, Mishnah Berura concludes you have to wash.
But if a majority does not appear or cannot,
doesn't matter. It's irrelevant.
Look at after Tashmish, we were supposed to go to the mikveh. We don't do that anymore.
That was a takana. A takana then we don't keep it. That's a takana. This is not a takana. This is a din d'Rabbanan. Netilas Yadayim was not a. Netilas Yadayim was masakin by the Nevi'im already. So this is a very early takana.
Netilas Yadayim for lechem.
For bread, yes.
So technically, if I take a tool, but if I take a fork or a knife or something and I use that, the either way side wouldn't have.
Correct. Right? If you dip your cookie in milk with a fork, you don't have to wash your hands. Now, who says that? Then we didn't see that in the Mishnah Berura. That's the Mishnah Berura Sivkat in Yadalid, where he brings down. Take a look in the Sivkat Yadalid. V'ayim v'divrei achayim v'derech achayim shekasav dim oichel hamerkachas ayidei mazlig yesh lahakel de'en tzach natil. If you eat with a fork, you have what to rely on, not to wash netilas yadayim. Okay, so Rabbi say the first halacha is a very interesting halacha that I would say most people are not aware of, and that is when you eat a food that's wet with your hands, you have to wash netilas yadayim. You go to the sink to wash off a grape. Most of the time, you're not drying off every grape. You have to wash netilas yadayim.
An apple, you can.
You go to what?
An apple, you can. That's a big fruit.
A big fruit, you can, right? You can, but you could also wash netilas yadayim. Be mekayim a mitzvah. Yeah.
I'm still troubled by how the large portion of the row makes us a chomer.
I'll show you many halachos that many people don't keep.
Because it's easier to do it that way. I mean, it's just it's less troublesome.
It's a minhag.
It's
convenient.
Get started somewhere.
How come we never came across it? No one ever taught the
this halacha?
Yes.
When I was in the 10th grade, I learned this halacha. I've been
10th grade. What happened to like 5th, 6th, 7th?
I don't remember that.
What? Before you're in 10th grade, we don't eat fruit. In America, people don't eat fruit, you know?
With the Dunkin' Donuts and the
Dunkin' Donuts. That's true. That is true.
I'm not allowed to dunk all year, only on Pesach. That's what it's.
Okay, so it's important to know. You want to be mekayim the halacha properly, you should wash your hands. Okay, this was just the introduction. Now why without a bracha? Because there's some rishonim who hold that halacha is not required.
Okay, so if some Rishonim say, a majority say you should wash,
right.
Some say you don't have to make a bracha, so you go along with that. But we don't go along.
No, for bracha, for example, for shalashudas, do you have to wash for Shal Shudas?
Technically not.
Absolutely. You know that the Shulchan Aruch says that if someone eats mezainis for Shal Shudas, they're probably not Yotzei.
You have to. So
You know
the
that?
Torah says you have to wash.
You know the Shulchan Aruch says, unless you're very full, if you just eat mezainis, you're not Yotzei. You're not even Yotzei.
Yeah, but you could make a motzi and mezainis if it's a meal.
Let's see if you eat a certain amount. But if, let's say, someone forgets Ritzei in Shal Shudas, they don't repeat over benching because there's a minority view that says you're Yotzei, even though we don't with mezainis. So even though we don't paskin that way, we're chayshesh. In other words, we only make a bracha if it's unanimous that you have to make a bracha. Anytime there's even a minority view not to make a bracha, we don't make a bracha. But we paskin me'ikar adin, you need netilas yadayim. Now, is the netila? Could you just wet your fingers? No. You need to wash your hands like you'd be washing for bread, says the Mishnah Berura. V'tzarch lezeh kol dinei netila k'may lepas. This is the beginning of the halacha. We're just getting started. Okay, fine. Now the question is, what about if you're eating something less than a kazayas? Do you need, if you're eating a small food that's dipped in a liquid less than a kazayas, do you have to wash your hands? Says the Mishnah Berura, umikal makayim, bepachas mikazayas, nirali, she'ein lahachmer b'zeh klal. If you're eating something less than a kazayas, you don't have to be machmer. Da'afilu bepas, harbe achroinim mekilin. Even when it comes to bread, many people are meko. You don't have to wash for bread less than a kazayas. Now, not just many people. Shulchan Aruch paskins, if you eat bread less than a kazayas, you don't wash until Sidayim.
What bracha do you make on it?
You know that? Somebody, they go to the pizza store and they have these little tiny things, You're not allowed to wash on that. You certainly can't make a bracha and you don't wash on that.
However, if you eat a grape, which is a barrier, then it's considered like a kazayas.
No, but that's for bracha achroina. That's for bracha achroina. You better eat more. Or you better... Rabbi say, look in the Shulchan Aruch in Sif Gimel. This is mamish telling you halacha psuka here. Sif Gimel, im oichel pachos mikazayis yesh misha oimer. There's an opinion. She'ein sarch netila. You don't wash your hands.
But you have to make a bracha.
No, you don't. You make hamoitzi. Yes. But you don't make an netilas yadayim, and you don't wash netilas yadayim according to the Shulchan Aruch.
Okay.
And you don't bench.
Now, 1 second. Let's say you eat less than a beya.
Right.
That's sif beis. Someone eats less than a beya, then you wash your hands without a bracha. If you're eating less than a beya of pas, you wash your hands without a bracha. If you eat less than a kazayas, Shulchan Aruch says you don't wash bichlal. The Mishnah Berura says there are those who are machmer, and therefore we're machmer to wash less than a kazayas, but you certainly don't make a bracha. But me'ikar hadin, one does not wash his hands for bread less than a kazayas. So says the Mishnah Berura here. If even for bread you don't have to wash less than a kazayas, then certainly for washing for peiros or for food that's wet, you don't have to wash less than a kazayas. Got it?
So when you're at the wedding at the washing station,
Karpas, less than a kazayas.
You should ignore them and sit down and make a hamoitzi on a roll like a mensch. Unless b'chlal you're supposed to be sitting when you make hamoitzi. You don't make hamoitzi standing.
So Karpas eat less than a kazayas.
So now this is the conclusion of the Mishnah Berura. Less than a kazayas, you don't have to wash your hands. So good. Let's back to Hilchos Pesach. Taf Ayin Gimel. By the way, I'm just going to add some fuel to the fire. Why does the Mishnah Berura conclude that when you eat less than a kazayas of a fruit that's dipped in a liquid, you don't have to wash netilas yadayim? What's his argument? He makes a kavachomer. If bread, you don't have to wash your hands less than a kazayas. Certainly fruit, where some Rishonim say, bizman hazeh, you don't even have to wash for, you certainly don't have to wash less than a kazayas. The Chida, in the Shal Shuvas Chaim Sha'al, if you want to look it up, the Chida was... What? Sfadim for sure are machmer on this even more than Ashkenazim. You should know. Says the Chida in the Shal Shuvas Chaim Sha'al, something very interesting. Let's see if I could get it over here. If I could get it over here. The Chida in Chelek Beis, Siman Lam and Ches, Ois Ayin Vav, very hard to find. He says the following argument. He said, if even for Pas, where you make a bracha on the Natila, you don't even have to wash at all, according to the Shulchan Aruch, less than a Kazayas. So certainly on washing for fruit, which you don't make a bracha, you certainly should not have to wash less than a Kazayas. Okay. Comes along the Shulchan Aruch and Siman Taf Ayin Gimel, and when he tells us about the Karpas, he says, "V'yikach me'a Karpas pachos mi Kazayas." You should take from the Karpas less than a Kazayas. Why? Why less than a Kazayas? Says the Mishna Siman and Sivkatan and Gimel, because if you're going to eat a Kazayas, now there's a question: do I make a bracha achroina now? Do I not make a bracha now? Now, why do we not want you to make a bracha achroina? Because if you're going to make a bracha achroina, then you're going to have to maybe make another bracha rishayna on the marar. And we know when you make a hadama on the karpas, you're supposed to have in mind the marar. So in order to avoid making a bracha achrayna on the karpas, you take less than a kazayas. So then why are you washing your hands? Why do you have to wash your hands? This is davar shetibulei b'mashka, and even by bread, you don't have to wash your hands less than a kazayas. So if it comes out that when you eat the karpas it's less than a kazayas, you should not have to wash your hands.
If you're making the bracha with the kavanah that you're going to eat the morah, between the morah and the karpas, you're going to have more than a kazayas.
What?
When you make the bracha...
No, but the morah is not wet.
He's talking about he wants to know why
It's not wet.
No.
But look at the time. But it's more than 72 minutes.
Good question. That's a very good question. That requires a whole separate shir. How you can make a bracha on the karpas and have in mind something that's a very long time later. Okay, but bottom line is the karpas and the chaber says is less than a kazayas, and you still have to wash your hands. So it's a stira in the Shulchan Aruch, because the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Kuf Nun Chasif Sif Gimel says on bread less than a kazayas. You don't wash, and by something dipped in a liquid by karpas less than a kazayas, he says you do wash. So I would answer that stira, well, it must be that when something is dipped in a liquid, it's more machmir than bread. But the Mishnah Berura himself, he concluded in Siman Kuf Nun Ches that something less than a kazayas, if it's dipped in a liquid, you don't have to wash. And the Shulchan Aruch in Hilchos Pesach says explicitly, not like that. And this is the question of the Bir Halacha in Siman Taf Ayin Gimel, that says the Bir Halacha, who's the Chafetz Chaim, that he says, my conclusion in Kuf Nun Ches is against the Sif in Taf Ayin Gimel. And therefore the Mishnah Berura does something that, as far as I know, he doesn't do anywhere else in the entire book. He retracts his psak. Okay? So you look back in Siman Kuf Nun Ches.
So you don't have to do what he said there.
Look what he writes.
He retracts.
Look what he writes. It's Mamish Apella. Look in Siman Kuf Nun Ches.
I know why.
In Siman Kuf Nun Ches, on the bottom line in the Mishnah Berura, where he says, you see on page 96, I want you to see this inside. Because, this is good schayra for Yom Tov. You go around saying, tell me...
This is what the child is asking them?
Yeah, this is...
Where?
Page 91.
Page 96. 10 bazooka gums. That's $22.50.
No, $25.
25? Oh.
In the Bir Halacha?
Okay.
Where are you in the Bir Halacha?
No. Siman Kuf Nun Ches, the bottom line in the Mishnah Berura, there's a little asterisk. And it tells you to look on the bottom. And after the Mishnah Berura says, I feel you don't have to wash unless in a kazayas. Omnam, mehatur. Siman Taf Ayin Gimel. And Taf Pei Vav. Loy mashma kain. There the halacha implies that you do have to wash your hands on something dipped in a liquid in kazayas. Ubatla daiti mibnei daitoi harachava. And even though logically I feel you should not have to wash your hands, but since the Shulchan Aruch says you do have to wash your hands less than a kazayas, I retract.
You have a footnote there?
On that footnote?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's from the printer.
So the bottom line.
But the Omna Mehatur are the words of the Chafetz Chaim himself. Now, how do I know that these are the words of the Chafetz Chaim himself? Because if you go in Taf Ayin Gimel in the Bir Halacha, on the bottom Bir Halacha, Pachas Mikazayis, he says from here it's very clear that something that's dipped in a liquid less than a kazayis, you do have to wash your hands. Even though the Mechaber and Kuf Nun Ches says that even by pas you don't have to. And listen to this. He says, V'zehu shaloi k'may shekasavnu sham b'Mishna Berura. This is not like I wrote in the Mishnah Berura. Ukvar he'iroisi zois, and I already pointed this out. Behadfasa shniya, in the second edition of Mishnah Berura, b'shulei hagilyain. So if you want a good trivia question, ask somebody. Tell me the one thing the Mishnah Berura retracted from in the second printing of the Mishnah Berura. In the first edition, he held that something less than a kazayas, you don't have to wash your hands for something dipped in a liquid. You see how chumrah this is? Where the Mishnah Berura is retracting and he's saying, in the second edition, even something less than a kazayas, dipped in a liquid, you have to wash your hands.
Is it possible, Rabbi, that the reason Rov B'nai Israel today don't wash,
maybe after this year they will,
is because we do during the course of the Seder many things that are Zechel and Tzias Mitzrayim,
right,
or in the Zechel and Mikdash,
okay,
right? So that we do this washing because in the times when we were Tahar,
right,
there were many things that we did. So we do this as a Zecher to when the Mikdash was standing.
Good.
And this is something that, when we do, because this is the time that we have Zachar.
No, but the question is, why don't we do it the rest of the year? Because
this is the time.
But the halacha.
Because we don't hold from it.
Not true. So that's what we're learning. The Mishnah Berura says we do hold from it, and you should do it, right? One second. So this is a stira where the Mishnah Berura in the footnote on the bottom of the second edition says, even though I feel logically you should not have to, and that logic is if you don't have to for pas, you certainly should not. But because the Shulchan Aruch says it, I'm mavata my das. But then Mishnah Berura says, I found in the Rashbates, who quotes the Rambam, if you look in the Rambam, in Hilchais, Chametz Umatzah, Perek Ches, Halacha Beis, the Rambam says explicitly when you take Karpas, you have to take more than a Kazayas. Why does the Rambam say that? Because the Rambam says, the Mishnah Berura holds like my original assumption, that you only have to wash your hands for a Kazayas, and therefore the Mishnah Berura concludes, but bottom line is, in Siman Kuf Nun Ches, he seems to have retracted from his psak that even though logically, what's the logic? The logic is if you don't have to wash for pas, then you certainly should not have to wash for something dipped in a liquid.
So he wrote the Bir Halacha after the second Hadfas?
Well, he wrote the whole Mishnah Berura, and then the second Hadfas, so he switched it in Kuf Nun Ches.
I think many people wrote. He didn't himself write the whole Mishnah Berura.
Well, his son,
his family, and
his son had involvement in Hilchos. So, but Rabbi Sai says the Ben Ish Chai. What do Sfardim do? Listen carefully. Sfardim are machmir, like the Mishnah Berura's correction. Says the Ben Ish Chai, afilu oichel pachas mikazayis, chayav litol yadav. The whole year. V'haraya, milel Pesach, that we eat karpas less than a kazayis, and we still wash our hands. Says the Kaf HaChaim, from the words of the Mechaber, are mashma, that even less than a kazayis you have to wash your hands. V'nira de yesh lahachmer kedivrei maran. I think I have a good raya, that the Mishnah Berura is correct in retracting his psak, that you have to wash in less than a kazayis. Because the Taz, in Siman, Taf Ayin Gimel, he writes, this that the Shulchan Aruch says you have to wash your hands for karpas is an open rebuke on those people who don't wash their hands the whole year. So I don't understand. What does this halacha have to do with the whole year? Well, in other words, this halacha, maybe the reason people don't wash is because it's less than a kazayis. if the Taz is pointing out, let's say the Taz says like this: Mikan yesh toichachas megula la'oisan she'ein izharin b'chol hashana lita koidem sheyochal davar shetibuli b'mashke deman ishtana halayla hazem mikol halaylos. Now, Rabbi say, let's think about the following: what do those Rishonim who hold that you don't have to wash your hands for something that's dipped in a liquid, what would they hold? You should wash your hands for karpas?
No.
Yeah.
Why?
It's halacha. It's in the Gemara.
If you don't have to do it for lechem.
So listen carefully. Says the Shulchan Aruch, says the Choik Yaakov, says the Chayei Adam, says the Aruch HaShulchan. Even those who don't wash their hands the whole year for something dipped in a liquid, for those who want to rely on the minhag ha'olam, the so-called minhag ha'olam, do they wash for karpas? Yes. Why? Says the Chayk Yaakov, Siman Taf Ayin Gimel Sivkatan Chavches, says the Chayei Adam, Klal Koflamet Sif Yadalid, says the Aruch HaShulchan, Ois Yirches, Kedei Sheyivdalu Hatinoi, guys. That even though the rest of the year they don't wash, so why all of a sudden they're becoming frumies the night of Pesach? It's so that the children ask.
Rabbi, these tinokas didn't ask. The real tinokas are going to ask?
So now listen carefully to this. Listen, very important. The Gemara says we eat karpas and we dip it in salt water. Rashi in Masechta Pesachim says, why do we dip it in salt water? So that the children ask. But it comes out that according to the Rishonim who hold you don't have to wash your hands for something dipped in a liquid, not only are we dipping so that the children ask, we're also washing that the children should ask. But according to most Achronim, why do we wash? Because you have to wash. Okay? So now listen this is unbelievable. So there are two possible reasons why we wash our hands for karpas. We would say, the halacha says like the Mishna Berura, because you have to. And the minhag ha'olam would say it's so that the children ask. There are many nafkaminas between these reasons. If let's say a person, instead of wanting to dip his karpas in salt water, let's say he would dip his karpas in bitter orange juice or apple juice, would he be allowed to?
No.
Well, the kids would still ask, so we're not ruining anything. But the halach is when you dip a vegetable or a food into a mei peiros, you don't have to wash your hands. So if the reason we're washing the night of Pesach because you have to, so then if you dip it in a mei peiros, you don't have to. But if the reason is so that the kids ask, even if whatever liquid, you still have to wash your hands because you're not doing it for a reason. You're just doing it to do something strange.
Well, we use my salt water because of the tears.
Okay. But let's say you wanted to use a bitter fruit juice. It depends. According to the reason, the halachic reason you have to, you could, and then don't wash. But if it's so that the children should ask, no, you can't use that kind of liquid. But still, this is all Reb Chaim Berlin points out that this would be a very big nafkamina, that according to the halachic reason that we wash our hands because it's davar shetibulei b'mashke, what if you use mei peiros? You wouldn't have to wash. Says Reb Tzvi Pesach Frank, who ever heard of dipping their food in a fruit juice? I mean, that would be like sacrilegious. So therefore he says, perhaps, even the halachic reason that we wash our hands, because we have to wash our hands, but we're also doing it so that the children ask. So this way, even if you're going to dip it in liquid, in fruit juice, you'll still have to wash your hands. Listen to another nafkamina, very interesting nafkamina. Some people for karpas, they eat potatoes. Anyone here eat potatoes?
Yes.
The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says the best thing for karpas is radishes. Some people use potatoes. Some Hasidim are makbid gomer not to use potatoes, because some Hasidim hold potatoes you make a shahakal and not a hadama. Right? Yep.
It goes in the ground.
Well, you have to know the history of potatoes. Potatoes are a recent discovery. And it's a good thing, Hashgacha Pratis, potatoes was a recent discovery, because if potatoes would have been around when they made kidneys, we wouldn't be eating potatoes on Pesach. So many people who eat potatoes eat it with a fork. Anyone here eat it with a fork?
That way you don't have to wash.
So if you're eating with a fork, do you have to wash or you not have to wash? If the reason we're washing our hands is because you're mechuyev to, so then now we're not mechuyev to. But if the reason is because you want the kids to ask, then you have to wash even if you eat it with a fork. But if, Rabbi say, according to what we said, that even the halachic reason that you have to wash, because it's Darshima holds also so that the kids should ask, so then even if you're going to eat it with the fork, you would still have to wash so that the kids ask.
So if you eat French toast, which you usually eat with a fork, then you shouldn't have to wash on it, even though it's bread.
No, but the fork thing doesn't help for bread.
Oh.
No, but if
just
you're
as an
eating
aside,
Yes, yes.
Just as an aside,
I'm listening.
you brought it up.
Yeah.
So potatoes weren't around when...
Yeah, the kidney.
Neither was corn. Corn was a much more recent discovery that I saw on YouTube.
Yeah?
Rabbi in Eretz Israel, not Haredi, but the beer to keep us from God.
Okay.
And he's quoted the Mordechai and the Rush that says that the Ashkenazic minhag regarding kitnius is a minhag shtuyot. Because corn wasn't there. The whole idea behind the rice and the beans, the crops were mixed, didn't exist. You don't have the same chashash. So why is corn? It goes on the whole...
Kidneys is a very interesting Indian.
Kidneys go.
I don't know exactly at the moment, but kidneys is a very interesting subject. Rabbi say, I'll tell you another nafkamina. So, anyone here eating with the potato with the fork? But according to what we're saying then, that even the halachic reason would say you want the kids to ask. Now here's the question. Who has to wash their hands? Everyone who has the karpas? Or only the balabayas? So it depends why you're washing. If you have to wash, everyone has to wash. If it's just so the kids should ask, only the balabayas has to wash. And by the way, if you look in the Rambam, the Tzvi Pesach Frank says, the Rambam very much implies that only the balabayas has to wash. Something to think about. But according to now, you ready? This is what I thought of, and Baruch Hashem, I found it. This might be good. We're saying now that even the svara, that we have to wash our hands, because Rav Rishonim hold that we have to wash, that's something that's dipped in a liquid, you have to wash. But this chiddush that we're saying, that even that opinion holds, there's another reason to wash so that the children ask, we may be able to answer the steer on the Shulchan Aruch. And the Mishnah Berura said, why is it that the Mishnah Berura said in Siman Kuf Nun Ches that he feels that something less than a kazayas you don't have to wash? Why? Because if you don't have to wash for bread, then you certainly don't have to wash for a davar shetivul b'mayim. But then the Mishnah Berura asks, so why by karpas, which is less than a kazayas, you have to wash? So I'll say, really, Mishnah Berura, you're 100% right. Logically, less than a kazayas, you don't have to wash. So why in Tuf Ayin Gimel do you have to wash? And then it comes out the Mishnah Berura did not have to be chayzer. And that's what Tzvi Pesach Frank points out in a footnote in the Mekroi Kodesh. But bottom line is Mishnah Berura was chayzer.
That means he doesn't hold.
He doesn't hold of this svara. He holds that the reason that you have to wash is not Kadesha Yishalu Atinaikais. You eat the karpas, you dip it in liquid, right? Kadesha Yishalu. But why do you wash your hands? You wash your hands because you have to wash your hands. So it's a very interesting little pocket of halacha. You could tell your friends, tell your neighbors, what is the one place in Mishnah Berura, when the Mishnah Berura retracts the Pesach, Kuf Nun Ches of Katan Chaf. Rabbi say, Shkayach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.